Uh, Wonderful. Um, if recording is a problem for anyone, please let us know. But we wanted to save this for future sort of consultations. And otherwise, yeah, very excited and happy to turn things over to Mark. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, everybody, it's great. Orla and Claire, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. Um, so what we have planned for you today is a little workshop session of critical code studies where I'll present everybody with a little bit of code, and then we can walk through it together. But before we do that, I have a few things I wanted to share with you all. Um, As Claire said, I'm Mark Marino, and I direct the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab at the University of Southern California. We have some of our members and affiliates here. Um, Both Claire and Orla are affiliates. And also, let's see, we have Brian and Lear. And really, if anybody's interested in being an affiliate, really a lot of it, the idea of being an affiliate is just that you're someone who is helping develop methods for critical code studies out there in the world. And and you're and again, this is a new process. So even when I share things with you about what I think that this process is, or again, I'm really just going to frame some questions, and then very much these, even though we've been doing this for almost 20 years, very much the reading practices are still quite nascent. So anyway, so we have some resources over there you can check out. Also, I'd be remiss not to mention the call is out for the Electronic Literature Organization Conference in Toronto in July. And if you take a look, you can see deadlines and things like that. I think it's not till January, but it's going to be in Toronto and Waterloo. And then the deadline for submissions is January 5th. And I believe the portal is already open. You can do papers and talks and some of this, I think there's some of these things you notice are marked as in person, and other things you could perhaps propose something virtual if you can't make it. So I recommend that very highly. Um, yeah, I guess let's get to it. Um, One more thing I'm going to say that while I have my browser shared, is there are also a few members of our ELIZA project, which Claire knows very well. This is a project where we're reading the code of the world's first chatbot system, ELIZA. And some of the members of our team are here. I think I saw Ant here, Anthony Hay. I saw, I think I saw Jeff sign on. I think I saw Art Schwartz sign on. So we've got lots of folks involved in that project. Of course, Claire was a respondent this summer to the draft of the book we're working on about this, and it's really I'm excited to share this with you in the future because there's quite a bit of good code reading in there. It really fulfills a dream of what I hoped critical code studies would be. But let's get to some slides just to set things up a little bit. Let me share a part of the screen. Portion of the screen. Here we go. Get some things out of the way. Shrink this a little bit. Get this out of the way. Excuse me. Shrink this. How visible that is, or legible. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. Yeah. 1 second. Almost there. Resizing. And I have to apologize a little bit to Lear, who's here, because Lear, I'm going to draw some stuff from our class. Lear was part of one of the first classes, really the first class I ever taught in critical code studies, which was really just last fall. And so some of the stuff we'll do. So Lear, that means you can't give away the answers to some of the questions because we'll do some familiar things. So again, so we got some affiliates. Let's see what we need. I think the most important thing, just of course, I think everybody here knows, but just for the sake of the video, critical code studies is the application of critical theory or hermeneutics to the exploration of the extra functional significance of computer source code. Extra means does not mean outside of, but growing out of. So I'm going to pause there for a second because some of my team members here from that I know from the ELIZA project, hermeneutics and critical theory don't necessarily mean the same things to everybody, or maybe don't mean anything to some extent to folks who don't live in that world. But the idea is that in a lot of literary studies, for example, we apply continental philosophy, other forms of philosophy to interpretation, and we use those as lenses. Sometimes we combine them, sometimes we use them independently, and they inform our readings of things. But of course, really anything can be a lens. Obviously, if we take a technological approach, or we're also using a hermeneutic, we're just not naming it typically. But again, some of these go into identity issues like race and gender. Some of them go into things like formal structures like class, and of course some of them just go into the most interesting ones, I guess we could use, go into just questions of meaning. So anyway, we'll get back to that. So another thing, it took me a long time to understand this notion that like critical code studies does not hold code as an end to itself, but as an entry point for exploration. So again, sometimes people will say, oh, well, what's the thing you found out about the code that was most interesting? And for me, I think as my team ELIZA people know only too well, I'm more interested in the conversation that the code allows us to have. The code is the focal point. And again, this is something that you would see in any cultural studies or literary studies or art studies, right? The object is the opportunity to have the conversation. But of course, we want to know how it works. So let me skip down to my little reading methods that show up at the end of the book. So again, the last chapter of the book, this is a little TLDR on that, gives you just a breakdown of how to read any piece of code. So I think it's the most important to just determine what it does, but in my experience, you determine what it does at a high level. So if it's a piece of software, you can run the software, you can see how it works. That's usually a good starting point for me. Now, eventually you'll come back and you'll want to know what each line does. And again, Team ELIZA is a perfect example. We spend hours staring at individual lines. There was one point where we spent an hour. We only made it through 8 lines, and then it became a sort of a competition to see how few lines we could make it through in an hour. And there was one time I think we made it through negative lines, and we definitely made it through 1 line. Now, and I mentioned this because of course, previous to this, I had worked on collaboratively read a single line of BASIC with Nick Montfort and 8 others in the 10 print book. So I know that 1 line of code can be enough for extensive conversations, but it is to say that if you understand, if you've seen what the effects of the code, that's a good starting point for your analysis. Then research the context of its creation, research the creators of the code. Again, often that's going to be multiple people, not necessarily though. Research its evolution, its development over time, any required hardware or software. I apologize for my strange sort of 18th century capitalization scheme I've got going on here. Research the genre of the program, right? So again, so often it's helpful to say, how much is this piece of code like other pieces of code in the same genre? Research its components and elements, and that could be everything from any libraries that it uses, or if there are methods that it's drawing on that might be familiar, it's good to know little bits of history of that. Any paratexts are of course helpful, especially for us cultural studies folks. I find it very helpful to read the code with others, comma equals. I think researching the programming language is more important than we usually give time to it, because what happens with somebody who knows a programming language, this is true, I think, with any language. As soon as you become fluent in it, it becomes more invisible to you. So I try to keep myself, and I think I'm pretty successful as a perpetual outsider to these languages. Like they never become naturalized to me because predominantly because I typically am not building things with these programming languages. So I'm always asking this silly beginner's question. Why is mesa? Why is table in Spanish? Why do we say it's female? What does it mean to have gender in a language, right? And hopefully I get past the true beginner's notion that like, oh, gender in language equals gender in humans, right? And I come to understand gender in a more complex way in terms of how it operates in language. But I think always for me having that lack of familiarity, um, it's not exactly the Columbo approach, but it keeps me, I think, asking questions that sometimes lead places, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes it's very frustrating for my collaborators, as they can attest. It's good to know how this code circulates. And now you'll see my last one, it says apply a critical lens. But to be honest, since ideology is something we can't really understand life without, I don't think we can really think without these lenses. Like we probably had these lenses on all along. Um, I list it last, even though it's probably what we do first. Um, so we could talk more about that some other day. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that as like the basic premises or some basic reading practices. So now let's just go in there and let's do it. I'm going to share another screen with you. Dun, dun, dun. And feel free to interrupt and ask questions and things like that. This is going to be a very interactive session, but let me find my doo-doo-doo. And somebody will edit this out in post, I know, but okay, there's the screen. Okay, so for today, we're not going to read Eliza. We're going to read The Gay Science, which is an interactive fiction. And I'm not going to use the help of Gemini right now. Thanks for offering. The Gay Science, written by Capricorn Van Knapp, which is a pseudonym. And I am happy to share this link to this Google Doc in just 1 second. But let's see what this thing is first of all. So we click over, it takes us to this link to a work of interactive fiction, The Gay Science. And we already see some of the paratextual information showing up on the left-hand side of the screen. We have this interactive truth by someone who loves you, release 1, serial number 20203, and form 7, build 6M62. So these are all things we can seize upon later if we want. Beginning type, or could it be Tipe, hard to tell, meets Pete when he oversees a school competition he himself won years ago. Type, or Tipe, is jealous. Pete is passive. Okay, so this is an interactive fiction. So if you've never done interactive fiction before, this goes back to this tradition goes all the way back to adventure, to Crowther's adventure, but the Colossal Cave. But we need to type some verbs. Let's see. Let's look and see if that does anything. That doesn't do anything. We could examine, I don't know, examine Pete. That's a problem. Let's see if we can get some help. Nope. Let's see if we can go any cardinal directions east. Complication. Pete suffers a great loss and disconnects from the world because of it. Let's go east some more, I guess. Transformation. Pete opens up about his troubles. Tipe then does the same. Let's keep going. And Tipe becomes confident enough to set aside his jealousy. Pete learns to assert himself. Let's see if I can get this thing to restart. Okay, so now we have another one. Beginning. A drunken game leads to Fana realizing he has feelings for Tam. Fana is arrogant, Tam is shy. Okay, well, we saw the cardinal directions work, so let's go the opposite direction. West, complication. Tam cannot say his true feelings. West, transformation. Fana and Tam have a knockdown, drag out fight. West End, Fana is able to see someone beyond himself. Tam is finally able to be himself. Okay, so I feel like we're starting to get the sense of this interactive fiction. We'll restart it one more time to see if what we get. Okay, so we're feeling this pattern. Won Suk is a police detective investigating the death of his mentor. His investigations lead him to believe Pete, a criminal, is connected to or maybe a culprit. Won Suk is jaded, Pete is passive. Okay, so I feel like we're getting the sense of this piece, how it works. And now I think it might not be a bad idea to look at the code, and I've pasted the code in here. So I'm gonna put this in the chat for you all so that we can look at this together. And this is just a little Google workbook that I've put together. I didn't, there's not too much in here right now. So let's go to the code tab. And now we see the code, and this is written in Inform 7. And Inform 7 is a language that's written for interactive fiction, and it looks very English-like. It is not English. That distinction is important to keep in mind. Get rid of this menu a little bit. So let's take a look at this. So it begins with, I hope you can read this. And those little brackets mean that something's being commented out in Inform 7. So this is not part of the code that's going to be processed. Let me see. We got a question from Ant. Mark, is that a link you posted? Oh, that's interesting. That does not seem to be a link, does it? There we go. That's a link. I hope this works. I hope the gay science by someone who loves you. Now, seem to remember we saw that on the first page, right? We could go back and look, but that was our title. This is the truth as I understand it. Chapter 1, Aletheology. Does anybody know offhand what aletheology means? And if you feel like Googling it and throwing it in the chat, that might come in handy. There is truth here. I have to believe that, for I may only make statements of truth here, for only the truth can save you. The branch of logic dealing with truth and error. Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense why we have these truth assertions happening so far in this code. The story headline is an interactive truth. And again, yeah, right. So ideally we might have more luck if we looked at this on VS Code or some sort of code editing environment. So again, we're losing some of the strength of what we would have with the syntax highlighting. But I put this here so that
sharing if you want.
Well, what I'd like us to do, the reason why I want to use this version right now is I'd like us to collectively annotate this. So, and it is not too, since Shaban has to leave early, it's not too early to start. So but to annotate it, can we just highlight something and put in a comment the way you would do comment any Google Doc? Because I want to keep this material. And what's his dark materials alethiometer? I don't know that reference.
Um, I was just thinking about that book. I forget the author now. It's a series of three books.
Hmm.
Um,
Philip Pullman, says Siobhan.
that's it, Pullman.
Hmm. The compass
Alethiometer
that tells
only,
the
whatever.
truth. Okay, Lear gives us it's the compass that tells the truth that works like tarot. Good. All right. So here we are in this truth world. Let's take a look at this a little bit more deeply. So only the truth can set you free. All right. So I guess the first question we would want to ask ourselves is who who is like what are these code comments? I hope you can read this. Who is being addressed there? So if this were, hey, let's go back to our intro to poetry class where they would say there's a speaker, and we would say, okay, who is the speaker and who is being addressed? So anybody have any feelings about who our speaker is here? Feel free to just chime in our live workshop session. If you feel better raising a hand and being called upon, feel free to do that. I'm not sure if I will see hands or not, but or feel free to just unmute yourself and say something.
Oh, Mark, you asking who are the comments for?
Yeah, who are the comments for?
Hmm. People who come later to fix bugs.
Okay. So when this speaker says, "I hope you can read this," do you are they talking to people edit are these people is this person talking to the person who's going to come and fix the bugs?
It kind of sounds like he's talking to himself.
He might be. Okay, so let's all right. Let let's keep this question open. I hope this works. I hope. Okay, so I think a lot of us have had that moment of desperation when working on code. Um, we'll see what the hope is for. So the
Hey,
gay
Mark,
side, yep.
Mark. One thing I find interesting, the alethiometry is, as someone said, the science, quote unquote science, from the science fiction series by Pullman. Now, the Golden Compass is kind of a compass and kind of not a compass if you read the book or watch the thing. But I'm wondering how that interacts with the whole north, south, east, west thing. So the
Ah,
like compass motif.
nice. I'm writing it down. I love that, Jeff. Yep. Let's hold on to that. We'll come
Yes,
back to it. So which is great. And again, like it's beautiful because that's such so again, this is where our comparative analysis comes in handy, right? Because we know that even in the first interactive fiction, those cardinal directions were so important to navigation. They were fundamental to how you read. Having this truth compass
Right, but
feels
they were
like it's
geomet they were actually geometric in adventure.
right.
And here they're, or I guess geographic is the right word, but here they may not be. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Beautiful. That write that one. Get that one in there in the annotations because that's beautiful. Okay, we're to keep going though because it says the gay science by someone who loves you. Okay, so now we got to think because we had typically that's where the author's name would go. That is not where the author's name is. Um, they're just saying someone who loves you. So it feels like our speaker is emerging. Um, it feels like there is a somebody and there is an us. Now, whether we decide that that person is Capricorn Van Knapp or whether we decide that that's some person that Capricorn Van Knapp made up. I guess the reason why I'm saying that name so ridiculously is because it is also a pseudonym for someone. So keep that in mind. Anyway, so someone loves us and they're leaving. Someone loves AU, whether we say that that's us or whether we imagine it's someone else or whether we think that they're talking to themselves, we'll decide as we go. This is the truth as I understand it. Chapter 1, Eletheology. There is truth here. I have to believe that, for I may only make statements of truth here, for only the truth can save you. The story headline is an interactive truth. Okay, all right. So now we got to figure out what the heck that means. What would an interactive truth be? So let's keep that aside. Only the truth can set you free. Okay, well that feels like a platitude, but I feel like maybe it's being used more meaningfully
Well, no,
here.
yeah, you're trying to escape. I mean, I don't know the whole story of this thing, but you're trying to escape from some maze, quasi maze thing, and the compass always points to the truth. That's what the alethiometer and the golden compass does. And the truth, it has a cardinal direction, north, south, east, west. And if you follow the truth. So, I mean, maybe we should play it a little and see what it actually does.
Well, we will see what it does, but we're going to cheat because we're going to see what it does in the code, which will give us
Yeah,
those
fair
answers
enough.
momentarily. But there is something. So I just put in my little notebook that there's something that is the maze, and we're going to decide what that maze. Like, what are we going to be freed from? Let's find that out moment as we read. Only the truth can set you free. Section 1, us, you and I. Okay, you are a man. All right, so we've now been assigned something, and that assignation is happening at a code level. The name you is being declared as a man, is being given this manness. Someone who loves you is a man. Okay, so right away, starting to think maybe that title, the gay science, is meaning the gay science. It's not meaning fröhlich, it is meaning gay, in a sense, in the sense of romance. So let's keep that in mind. Although I don't think let's keep that title is important to keep in the back of our minds always as well. A person has some text called an appearance. Again, all of this is legal Inform 7 stuff. Now, people have taken me to task for this a little bit, but I find Inform 7 to be squirrely a little bit, because it looks so much like English, and you want so much for it to be natural language, but it is really not. And in fact, I think it's not Englishness is becomes really difficult for novice programmers sometimes. Anyway, so they have an appearance. Appearance of a person is usually nondescript. Okay, well that's a strange choice, and we got to think about why why give someone an appearance if your appearance is going to be nondescript? I don't know. We'll table that for a second too. But if anybody has thoughts, feel free to chime in. The appearance of you is striking. I don't usually notice appearances. So I guess if we had looked at them, maybe if we had looked at, we could try that in the game, but maybe if we had looked at the person, we would get this description. I don't usually notice appearances. Honestly, I am not a visual person. I often forget what things people look like. Asked to describe after the fact leads to my speaking in vagaries, generalities, but not you. For days after we met that first time, I would find myself wondering at the color of your eyes, the dimple that appeared when your mouth quirked into a smile, the warmth of your hands upon my shoulder. Wow, that's just lovely, nice little piece. So again, should we see if we can evoke that from the text? So if we said look at Pete, look at you, examine Pete, examine you. Interesting.
I also tried doing all the different ways to get it, and I couldn't. So
so
What
does that
about
mean
me?
okay
Me.
yeah, let's do it. Let's look at me. As good looking as ever. Wow, that does not feel rewarding. No. Okay. Interesting. All right, let's go back into the code then. So now look, that little profession that apparently we would somehow access if we could get to this appearance, is followed by some more comments in the code. I miss you so much. Okay, so now we're getting this story of this I, whoever this I is, whoever you decide this speaker is. I miss you so much. I wish I had been more honest with you or with myself. So we're definitely getting this love story starting to come through. I wish we both had understood What you were, you are to me. So again, this feels like a love story of like, this is not a light love story. This is as big as it gets.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
can we, just for the view of it, can we just kind of get an overview of what this code looks like before we go through it line by line? I
Oh
just have,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
is
yeah.
there a statement somewhere or anything like that? Where's the
100%.
actual decision making in the
We
code?
have we have
This is all,
sections.
so this is all we're going to do what we do in Eliza, which is spend 3 hours just looking at it, printing out messages.
100%. And again, you guys do have access to this on the link. Don't let me drive the boat too slowly, but for sure. Yeah. So we got section 2, we got the world. Section 3, or we have chapter 3. Did I skip something? No, section 2, the world. Okay, so things get, and something called eternal recurrence gets named in this world section. Does eternal recurrence ring any bells for anybody?
Wait. No, you're not doing what I asked.
I,
I'm
I,
not
I
going to
I'm
see the
gonna be
whole
doing.
thing.
I'm gonna be doing
You're
it.
diving into pieces.
I will. I'm just throwing that as a question for the
I
chat.
don't
So we
see
got
how does it respond to North, for example, here?
okay. So some of that is going to come out of. All right. Let's keep going. So chapter 2, we got beloved
This is all
stranger.
just like talking, which is important, but we don't want to like just look at talking, right?
Okay, and we've got those traits being defined in this section. Yeah.
Hmm.
Section 2, we have you.
Aha, okay, here we go. So
Okay.
now
To
here's something
choose
that's
the
interesting.
protagonist, choose a random row from table of protagonists. Now the printed name of you is blank. Now the trait of you is the empty trait. Now the good ending of you is the good ending. Now the bad ending is the. So there's a table somewhere coming up. And so to choose the other, choose random row from the
All right,
table of the
so
beloveds.
this is set up. Okay.
Okay. So now we get the beginning,
Now we're at the beginning. Okay.
right? So to choose the beginning, choose randomly from the table of beginnings. Okay. To say how it started, choose the protagonist, choose the other, choose the beginning, say the description of the beginning. Okay. So there's going to be a table coming up. The
Where's there an
heaviest
input?
the heaviest weight, again, I'm going to ask for the chat if the phrase the heaviest weight has rings any bells with anybody. If not, feel free to Google it. It perhaps might be relevant here. So we got the consequence of the beginning is the complication. So remember how we saw the complication is a room. Remember how we moved through the complication? Jeff, this is the answer to our other rooms. So
Right. I know.
consequences
So
are
I want to see where there's an input.
we're getting there. To say that we are allowed, and remember, some of this is going to be part of Inform itself, that the machinery it's going to rely on. So it's going to choose the complication from the table of problems. Now, chapter 4, always the hour of noon. Transformation is so that was our second room we came across. The consequence of the complication is the transformation.
My God.
Okay. To choose the transformation, you choose a random row from the transformation table. All right. So again, a lot of this is like a poetry generator. It's just pulling from different buckets, just like the Oulipo did, or the Dada, or the Surrealists. The end is a room. So here's the happy hour. The description of the end is where the story ends. The consequence of the transformation is the end. The end has a truth state called happiness. The happiness of the end is usually false. To say where this story ends, if a random chance of 1 and 1 succeeds, now the happiness of the end is true.
Well, that's if you end up in this room in the end.
Which we have, right? We keep going east. Otherwise, say the bad ending. And so, because I love you, I cheat and give you only happy endings. It says we might come back.
How does this code? But you just said if I keep going east, how does this code organize the rooms? Did we miss that?
I can maybe, Mark, if it'd be helpful, show the map.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hold on, let's have you share and share the map.
Let's see if I can get this running. Okay. Great. Can you guys see a panel of the code and a little map now? Okay.
Oh, there's this whole other thing. Aha.
So once you can compile something in Inform, it will build you a world map because and Mark, correct me if at any point I'm saying something that sounds wrong. all sort of points in Inform, it is based on a room structure. So you do
All
have
right,
north.
wait, but I'm just asking a question. So somewhere that map is implied by this code?
Yes. So when you
Ah,
compile but the way this one sort of works differently is it's kind of avoiding a physical map because we get down to the consequence section
Okay.
where it's instead of going somewhere, you move the player to the consequence of the place that they already are. So here, the beginning, the eternal recurrence, the complication, the transformation, the end are not actually physically linked. So it shouldn't matter which direction. You should always get from the beginning to the eternal recurrence, whether you go north, south,
Well,
east,
how do
or
you get, but wait, okay. How
well,
does it
here's
know what the map
yeah.
is?
Yeah. Wait. One of the things you need also, Claire, if I may, is
Mhm.
if there's this moment right here where it says a room has a room called the consequence.
Yeah,
Instead of
what is that
going
doing?
nowhere from a room, move the player to the consequence of the location. So that's in this section right here, section 6.
Is that like an execute? Is it moving to the room, which is the consequence, or is there a room called, I missed something. Can
So
you
a
So
room is defining the feature of a room. Any room that's created, anything that's called a room, now has another room called the consequence.
right,
So instead of going nowhere from a room, you go into the consequence, which is
of that room,
a room
or
of that
just to
room.
the
Yeah.
room called consequence?
No, whatever's assigned to the consequence. Remember those earlier
So it's a
rooms? We
so it's
kept
a so
calling
it's
them
a
consequence.
it's an eval. It's actually going to the room that's in the variable consequence.
Right. So the consequence of the transformation is the end. So that's setting up the room of the
Right,
room
right,
of
right.
the
So from
transformation. Yeah.
transformation, if you hit that, go to consequence, it's going to go to the end.
If you try to go
Oh, wow,
anywhere,
Jesus. So wait, let me get back to one other question. So I missed when you were describing. I'm sorry, what's the name of the person who was?
Claire was talking. Yeah.
Oh, was that Claire? Okay.
Our
You're just
that was
wearing
our
different
Claire.
clothes than yesterday, so I don't encode you. Sorry. The so can you go back to
Yep.
her
Yeah.
screen?
Claire, share your VS Code version or your
How is the
language version.
map? You said something really fast and I missed it.
Mhm.
Did you draw, well, not maybe not you, the person who wrote this, was it you? Did you draw the map or was the map computed from the text code?
The map is computed by Inform when you have a successful
So
build.
where, oh, I see. This one doesn't actually have, this one uses this eval function, this eval method to go from A to B. So
Yes.
normally what would you see in the code if like BG is next to ER? Would it say
Normally you
somewhere in the,
see arrows or doors or
Well, you,
okay,
stairs.
so
you
there's something in the inform code that says, right,
right.
okay.
And in Inform, you could say, whatever, transform is east of
So one
some other
last question,
room.
then I'll shut
Yeah.
up.
No.
So when you write this
These are
normally,
important
this is a
questions,
funny
Jeff.
case because it has this eval function, which is really interesting, but I want to ask the base case. So normally when you write this, do you write the map first and then you kind of encode it into the thing?
Depends on what you want to do. I think a
I
lot of
see.
times people will write scenes sort of a room at a time. So you'd
Okay, all right.
categorize things that are in one scene and or one room and then
So there
say
are
here
different
are all
mode,
the objects in these rooms. Um,
different ways of approaching the programming problem here. Okay,
yeah. And this
I'll
is
shut up.
definitely a
I've taken
stylistic.
enough of people's time here. Sorry.
No, Jeff, that was super important because we were taking for granted things that, again, if you spend a little time in Inform, are obvious, but they're not obvious in any way. So
Well,
I
so
so
we
hopefully everybody has, I do now, hopefully everybody else has a slightly better sense of what's going on here, as opposed
correct.
to just like reading a bunch of prints.
Oh yeah.
I
And
got it.
and, and one more thing we have in the comments we have Lear saying no matter which direction you move spatially, you only ever move in one direction temporally, I guess, towards consequences. And Shaban adds, unless you started at the end and ran a backward path, memento
Right. So
law.
this is a particularly interesting piece of inform code because it uses this eval um, um, method. What do I want to say? Algorithm. It's not quite an algorithm. This eval function, this eval methodology to move, which is probably quite unusual for an inform program. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
I'm done.
I mean, there's one more thing we probably should show you there's one room that's different that we see later on in the code, and that room shows up here in the happy hour, or sorry, hold on, let me go to home. So in section O, Fati Amor, again, if that phrase might ring familiar to people, feel free to throw it into Google. I think you'll very quickly see where these phrases are coming from. If time is a circle, how do you escape it? So home is a room. Okay, let's see where home is located. Home is inside from the beginning. Home is inside from the complication. Home is inside from the transformation. Home is inside from the end.
So if you
So,
say go inside, it'll go home, basically.
well, let's find out if that's the case. So we're gonna go our direction to the end, and now let's see what happens. We went inside, and it says, "You found me, or I found you, as we promised. We are found, my love."
So it
It
just
says
went home.
it went home right away. It
I
went all
see.
the way home.
Got it. So
And
this
that's
answers
really
the question
interesting
I
because
was
that's the
asking
only way
before.
you get the end in the inform structure, if that makes any
Right.
sense, right? Like that's
Yeah.
you
So
get
this
the
was
big
so this
bold.
answers the question I asked before about how do you make the map? It's like this: home is inside from the beginning is a hard link in the. So if you say inside, it's going to go. So this phrase, this motif, this line of code, X is direction from Y is a piece of code motif that actually defines the map.
Right, right. Part of inform, yeah.
Which
So, yeah,
I had
go ahead.
one question mark, and I don't know if this was just me or if anyone else tried running the version that was on the interactive fiction database. I had to change some things to get this to compile, and I don't know if that's
Oh, you downloaded it and you had to change some aspects of the code?
yes
Okay.
to
What
get
did
it
you have
to
to
run.
change, Claire? Yeah, what happened? What did you have to change?
I specifically had to change the line right after section one that said there was a man or you were a man. I had to get it change it to just like there was a man called you with the way Inform sometimes does assigning characters. And I had to take out, it didn't like the fact that you were in the eternal recurrence. So if I took that out and you were in the beginning instead of the eternal recurrence, it would run fine. But mainly, I think it was some slippage between the poetry that they're trying to use with the language and the way that Inform gets slightly finicky or squirrely, I guess was the word you used, when it comes to assigning character names and actions.
And I mean, we have to ask the question at some level of was any of that intentional?
Oh, this
I
is very interesting.
assume so if the point of this is to have someone read it.
Right,
And it seems like a lot of it is about difficulty in overcoming that. So the idea of
right.
having small changes to say if you can do that, then you can actually access it makes sense to me.
So,
But
so,
also
so, so can you type just because I think it'll be interesting to see can you type in the chat exactly the change you had to make to get that code to run? And then so now I'm gonna open it up. So folks in our since I laid down that challenge or that question, has anybody sought out the origins of Fatih Amor or the heaviest weight or any of those things just to Google around to see what came up? Or if it rings bells to you naturally.
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Okay. Where, in what any context there, Ant?
I just googled it. It was saying that that yeah, he'd talked about it.
Okay.
The Amor Fati.
Amor
Sorry.
fati, yes. And the heaviest weight.
So
And the eternal recurrence.
I was just looking at the Inform programming language page, which people should
Yes.
look at. It's actually quite interesting. Um,
Yes.
there's the whole Z machine thing. So this is a Z, probably presumably this came from Zork or something. I don't
Yeah.
know what Z
Yeah.
stands.
It all came from the Inform games.
I don't know if Zork was it was Zork an Inform game?
Yeah, Zork was an Inform game.
No, I think
Sorry,
Zork
sorry, so
actually.
sorry. Infocom is what I'm not saying. Infocom
Oh,
is
Infocom games.
yeah, they
Right.
all so the Infocom games sort of gave birth to the contemporary interactive fiction world, but through some back quarters. But I'm going to keep us on Nietzsche for a second. So if you go to this third tab, then I have the sadly for a professor the cliff notes of the gay science from, and again I apologize, it's not from the Cambridge Companion, it's from the Oxford Handbook, um, and gives you a little cliff notes on some things related to the notions of eternal recurrence, amor fati, things like that. Um, and if you pursue this a little bit, you get to Nietzsche's notion of eternal recurrence, which isn't. It's more of an existential philosophical postulation. If we imagined our lives, if we lived every moment of our lives, if we were going to live them out our entire lives endlessly the exact same way, that's the notion of eternal recurrence, that you just sort of imagine that out into infinity, and then it's like a Zen koan. It has an impact on the way you think of your life, any moment in your life. Also, we get this other notion of gay in here, of joyful, of course, because we've got the gay. We actually literally have this, like the title of the piece is the title of Nietzsche's work. Die Fröhlich, well, the translation, I'm going to butcher it. Die Fröhlich Wissenschaft. And then in the gay science, some of those ideas of eternal recurrence get introduced. I believe amor fati also gets introduced. Can anybody parse? How's your Latin? What's amor fati mean?
Loving something.
A love of fate.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna pause on this one for a second. Matilda, yeah, just contact me, and I can figure out a way to get you on a email list. I see you have to leave. So love of fate. We have these. I'm just gonna. So now things have become more complicated, right? Because originally, if we read this and we didn't have Nietzsche in the back of our minds, we had purely just a love story. But if now we know that the gay science is the same name of the work by Nietzsche, and that it's postulating things about the nature of existence, in certain ways, right? In the framework of this notion of the eternal recurrence, how does that inform, not to, well, probably to make a pun, the way we see this game? Okay, so far, what do we know about this game? Well, we know that it creates a random story drawn from this table at the end that has two people who are in some sort of relationship to each other. Well, they seem to be in love with each other. It seems like, based on our reading so far, they tend to not have, like, there's something that separates them. And then they can either have a good or bad ending infinitely.
My God.
So when we see this, does that feel like, do we feel like we're in Nietzsche's world at that point, or do we feel like we're just in a love story generator at that point? Do we have a table of beginnings? Let's look at some of these beginnings just to sort of play these out. You and someone who loves you. Now that's interesting, right? So remember, this story was written by someone who loves you, but in the table that creates the beginnings, you and someone who loves you are plugged in as the variables, right? So even though they get replaced with the names of the characters, remember our first one that was kind of that strange one, Tipe or Type and Pete. Here, those other those specific characters seem to be avatars for the you and the someone who loves you, and the you and the someone who loves you seems to be the author of this code and whoever is reading this code.
Yeah, it seems to be like enacting that eternal occurrence, right? Of like reincarnation in a way, right? Like you are a new ego every time, a new person, a new identity, but you are who you are, right? And it kind of loops it through the code until you look inside, whatever that could mean, to like get out of that loop, right? To break free of the niche like cycle.
Right, right. There it is. Okay, great, great. So we're gonna be playing out this love story forever. Now, Lear has a question: which is which in your opinion? Meaning, which do you mean by that, Lear?
Hello. Okay. Sorry, I was muted.
No, no, you're unmuted.
You were saying that you and someone who loves you could be the author and the person reading the text. And the way you said it made it sound like someone who loves you is the reader, but I was wondering if that's what she meant, or if she meant it
Oh
the
no,
other way.
no, I misspoke if I ordered them that way. It seems like someone who loves you is the person who's writing the code. It seems like you is the person who's reading the code. Okay, let's take a look. We got to go to one passage of the code. We got to look at maybe a decision point that happens. So let's scroll up. Well, actually, let me not say that. Let me let you guys look around this code for poke around it. I have no reason to skip to the ending. I'm going to stop sharing and let you guys scroll around a little bit and see what you notice in this code and you feel like commenting now that you have a little bit more of that context. And this is where I have to ask Lear not to give away the one thing that's our thing that will someone will eventually get to that. Ant, you've unmuted. Does that mean you're gonna say something?
Well, I was just wondering about the gay science, yeah?
Yeah.
Gay, not as in homosexuality.
I mean, in Nietzsche's use, it's not, but we did see that both of those characters were assigned to men, so
I couldn't tell from the names.
but yeah, right.
In the 1920s and 1930s, gay just meant having fun. You were happy and half drunk and having a good time. I don't know about before that, or since Nietzsche wasn't American, I had no idea what really meant in his time. Gay turned on autocorrelations later, probably in the 50s or 60s.
So if we have code that assigns both characters to men in a story that tells endless love stories, though, I think it's hard to say it only means the gay only means one thing in this story.
It could be a pun. The gay has two meanings.
I think we have lots of punning happening here. I think we have punning happening throughout all of this.
But has he also distorted something if it's based or around or on Nietzsche?
Well, to be honest, I think this is a playing off of Nietzsche, because even eternal recurrence, this is going to be what's his name? What's his pen name? Capricorn Van Knapp's version of those Nietzsche concepts. So when you say eternal recurrence, you don't have to know the way Nietzsche understood it. You need to decide how does Capricorn Van Knapp mean it in the context here. So that thing that Brian was doing with it of like reincarnation or whatever, well, Nietzsche doesn't have any reincarnation in it, but this story certainly has reincarnation in it, or it has something that feels an awful lot like, reincarnation, or that love story repeats over and over again. Again, so Nietzsche becomes a touchstone and an inspiration, but not the answer key.
So it's not trying to interpret what Nietzsche's saying.
Yeah, I think it probably would be better to think about it as riffing off of what Nietzsche said, just like we're riffing off of that uh, alethiometry,
Alethiometer.
alethiometer. There we go. Yeah. So this is interesting. Lear says, I just Googled the name table and it seems to come from a series called Sodus. Wow. Okay. All right. I love that.
Or
I don't
maybe I
know.
should explain. I tried Googling the different names of the name table, and they seem
Yeah.
to be from this Boys Love, I think the Thai show. And just Googling one of the characters page gives me names of some of the other names that are in the table. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think there might have
Wow.
been
Good
some inspiration
find.
there.
Okay. All right. Extra points for Lear on that find. Nicely done. That's not the we didn't find that the first time around, did we?
I don't think we did.
No, nice. Easter egg. And so what have you gathered about this show though? You said it's a Thai show?
I'm not sure. I need to look at it a
Okay,
little
okay,
bit
okay, okay.
longer.
Look
Um,
deeper. Don't let me disrupt.
yeah,
Look
it
into
seems to
it.
be a show about boys' love, so kind of, this feels good, wholesome drama thing with pretty boys,
Okay.
but that's about it.
Okay, okay. Interesting. Wait, do we think this is Soda's fan fiction? Is it what we're reading?
Maybe.
Or it's some sort of Sodus Nietzsche slash fan fiction?
What I'm wondering
I
is,
think this is what we call a mashup.
A
What
mashup.
it
Okay, fair
is
enough.
they
All
like
right.
they've taken a bunch of some stuff from
Yeah,
Nietzsche,
yeah,
some stuff from
yeah,
this. They
yeah.
just like the title, The Gay Science. I was just reading about the source of the phrase, the gay science. It actually comes from this long, complicated thing having to do with the knowledge you need to do, or the sort of attitude of mind you need to do to write poetry. It's like deep in randomness. So I think you're looking at a mashup of slightly related random ideas around everything from gayness to poetry.
So think about so the random mashup, Jeff, though, feels a little bit pejorative. Is it possible
No,
that
random is a function that
okay,
generates
okay,
random numbers. It's not
okay,
pejorative.
okay. So we're laying these down as things that are playing off of each other in our as I've learned from Lear in our semantic field as we're doing our interpretation. All right. Now, when I'm staring at the screen, I'm assuming that you guys are staring at the code. So let me know other things that you observe as you notice. And I'm purposely not sharing screen because I don't want to disrupt your perusal. Maybe one thing that I will throw out there is that the context of this piece is extremely important. So this was entered in the second Ryan Veeder um, quadrennial exposition for good interactive fiction. Ryan Veeder is a writer of interactive fiction, and he has quadrennial invitationals because he was born on a leap year, and he only so he celebrates his birthday once every 4 years. This past year, he had a group of writers, including me, create an interactive fiction called Moondrop Isle or Moondrop Island, I think, if I'm getting that title correct. I don't know if we have any of those authors here. But this particular piece was written for a challenge in that invitational to write beautiful code. So let's see if I could find the information about that category and share that with you guys right now. Yeah, let me share the screen just briefly. So here's the exposition format, event one. Here we go. Event two. Oh no, this was event one. Entries in event one were written over the course of one weekend. The challenge of event one was to create a game in Inform 7 with beautiful source code text. And then if we go in here, you'll see other entries in there. And they really are wonderful to behold. Scarlet Portrait Parlor, we have a reading of that by Ryan Boyd in the latest issue of DHQ. But you also, let's see what else. I really like Caduceus. That's another great one, but to take a look at. But again, so context is relevant here. That these, rare is the case that somebody writes their code with the explicit desire to have other people not only read it but to pore over it and scrutinize it. And of course, to appreciate it, the code itself is beautiful. So again, for critical code studies reasons, I don't like to make this our only example because, right, this is something like poetry that's read to be analyzed. And I think we can find meaning in very pedestrian code, but at the same time, this is why we make art. So it's enjoyable to read something that's written to be read and explored. Okay.
Mark, could
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
just ask, did you just say that people don't usually make code to be read and appreciated? Did you say that?
I may have said that. I believe that's what I said, Anne.
I was just thinking that for ordinary code, quite often you are writing it so that it can be understood by other people. I mean, obviously you're not necessarily trying to make it a work of art, but if it isn't understood by other people, then you can be in big trouble if you have a large pile of code that nobody else can understand.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think my comment comes more from an experience that I've had talking to programmers where I introduce myself and then me or someone else says what I do with critical code studies. And then the programmers look at me very sometimes skeptically, sometimes sheepishly, like, please don't read my code too carefully. But often I think what they think that I'm going to do is like I'm going to expose some part of them, like either they're cheating or their poor solution to a problem or their bias that somehow is baked into their, that I'm there to somehow reveal some part of them. So I think obviously I appreciate that comment, and as a lifelong programmer, this that's the best practices. You're writing it so other people can read it, but I think this is a very specific situation where you're saying not only inviting people to read your code, but appreciate my code for how it was written. You're saying like, come look at, I've written this code so that it will be beautiful in my eyes. So come look at it. I think that's a unique situation.
And it looks like as well, I think Brian commented this on the document, the assumption that someone will read the code is baked into this project, which is really interesting. Not necessarily for utility, but specifically for aesthetic value, which I don't even think, I mean, we in this reading group have looked at some code poetry as well, which is a combination, I think, of the functionality being necessary and the code itself being legible, but not nearly to this extent in terms of the comment sort of reading as their own kind of poem and counterpoint. So yeah, I think the structure here is really interesting. And I always find it fun where the judging system for this is really kind of bonkers. It's just like Ryan Veeder says, I decide whatever I want. That's what goes. I don't have to be beholden to anyone. This is my quadrennial, like, deal with it. And I think on the one hand, that's a wonderful way to say, yes, aesthetic beauty is literally in the eye of Ryan the beholder, but also um sort of avoids making any more grand or more generalizable claims about what aesthetic code might be. And I mean, we have
Yeah.
Jeff and Winnie Sun, like there are ideas of that more broadly, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, he's like a delighted tyrant king of his birthday, that kind of a thing. He and interestingly too, like again, if you know Ryan, again, any of these things, if you dig in a little deeper, you'll find some things. And I think at 15, I'm gonna have to get to some answers just to make some revelations. But Ryan eschews deep meanings of interactive fictions. He claims that he solely wants to make them fun, and that's it. That's the only thing that interests him. Now, I think I think he's dissembling a little bit. I don't think that's exactly what happens. I think for him, fun fun means there's linguistic play, there's play to meaning all sorts of things. So but he does claim that that's how he feels. Brian, I see an interesting comment from you in the chat that says that's when I talk to critical code studies to my undergrads who are studying code but haven't worked as a programmer yet, they are excited at the idea of close reading code. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I was teaching in the Writing 150, the technology thematic.
Oh, holy
That's like
moly.
a freshman. So I got a lot of like computer, science undergraduates, their first semester in college. And we actually read the introduction to critical. I assigned them the introduction to critical code studies.
Oh my
And it
goodness.
went well. Yeah, it was very interesting. But I wanted to get in there early and tell them like think more of the why of what you're doing and how your ideologies are implicated in your code and stuff, just kind of get them thinking about that. And they weren't
Oh,
as hostile as seasoned programmers. You know what I mean? Like there's a
yeah.
hostility, I guess, to the people who have worked in the industry or who have
Yeah,
engaged.
I don't know. I feel like
with-
Art and Ant, who are perhaps seasoned programmers, have tolerated
Okay, great.
a lot of these shenanigans and have proven to be quite adept. And Art, you're I need your comment, Art, and you're muted, so unmute.
I prefer rather than seasons fruitful.
Uh, ba basted, basted and baked sufficiently.
That's tomorrow.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But yeah, no, but both Art and Ant have tolerated, but there is, I feel like, especially with Ant, I've had long conversations about the why, the what are we, I mean, you he gets it right away, but it's like the what, like what are we after, right? Because I think when you're schooled in when you're trained like we are primarily in interpretation, then the game is apparent right away. Like the goals of it are sort of like we learned the goals a long time ago and we just have sort of internalized them. But the sort of like what are we after? Which I love that Ant constantly asks me that question. Like what are we looking for here? And to some extent, a lot of the answer is we don't we don't know what we're looking for. Like we're observing and noticing and making connections, I guess. And does that harmonize with how you've come to understand it?
Yes, I'd quite like to ask. I mean, this might sound like negative, and I don't mean it to be, but is it possible that sometimes you're looking for meaning where there isn't really any meaning? You know,
Yeah,
code was
you
written to do a thing,
oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's
No,
nothing deep.
that's a great question. The answer to that question in my experience is we're making meaning.
No, I think that you're looking at um, the underlying pathology of the developer. You're
Sometimes, yeah.
there isn't has been stressed. Not that I believe it because I'm in software. Has been stressed. Often the developer puts in his own, I don't know, psychological basis when he writes code. You tried to point out, and others have tried to point out, when I Weizenbaum wrote his code, that he have some 1950s, 1960s ideology that he put in the code with the naming of variables and so on. That's an unconscious thing that someone does when he develops code. When you develop code, you don't just say, well, I'm going to develop code irrespective of my environment. You basically ignore the environment in developing your code. At the same time, your environment becomes part of the code. Your
Yeah.
beliefs, your naming of variables, the way you articulate things, they become part of the code. But I would make one comment about, and to you and Ann, about code that you want people to understand. There
Yeah.
was case in the time Weizenbaum was alive. In
Yeah,
fact,
he didn't expect anybody else to read it.
no, understand the difference. In the 90s, it became obvious that if people didn't understand the code, then you had critical people in the development side whose presence was required because they were the only people that understood the code. Now that I
And
carry on,
job security.
that's correct. So the idea of understanding code is one that is a latent development, uh, in the sense that the people who make decisions, those are the managers, not the programmers, became aware that they had a problem in their organization and that they had someone who they really didn't like but had to keep
Yeah.
because they're the only one that understand a piece of code. In my case, that's always been the case.
Well, I'm going to interject one more thing, and then I'll get to the answer key, I guess. One thing is, so my good friend and collaborator Jessica Pressman once said to me, she once helped me see that when she wrote about fiction or poetry or movies, that she really saw that as a creative act. That she felt that she was making something out of that piece, and I think that there is so maybe some sort of collaboration that's happening at that point. It's the reader. Now, again, did I plan this? I don't know. Is that the conversation that's happening between someone who loves you and the you who they hope encounters their code and reads it deeply? Is that the relationship that's finally happening when we interpret it, right? When we bring our interpretive, whatever it is, it's an imposition to some extent, but it's our mind's interaction with that code, and something gets made. And whether that was intended or not, I guess that's the real key. It doesn't matter to me whether that was intended or not, because a new thing has been made. So here, if it's okay to share, are just one thing we should look at in this code, I guess. First, I can reveal that Dan Ravipinto is the author of this code. That's the person whose pen name is Capricorn Van Knapp. So if people wanted to, they could look him up, and I'm happy to spell his name out. But again, that it helps. Once you know him, you can look in, just like we do with Weizenbaum, you could look into his other works. And then let's take a look at one little piece of code right here, which may be our most important piece. So we get to this moment in the section called the happy hour. And we have this little passage here to say where this story ends. If a random chance of 1 in 1 succeeds, now the happiness of the end is true. Say the happy ending. Otherwise, say the bad ending. So the question is, how does this one line resolve our random selection? Any speculation? Now, again, you may not know it is always true. And so we have this comment. And so because I love you, I cheat and give you only happy endings.
It's very interesting to me to think about sort of programming structure as cheating. Like writing a program in the way that you design it to do as cheating, but that's beside the point.
No, that's great. I mean, right? Because how could this person cheat? They're writing the program. There is no cheating. This is how they decided the story should go. But I guess, again, so in their representation of these, the what Brian pointed out, that like eternally recurring love story for this person, they've engineered it. They've stacked the deck, they've loaded the dice. It is only ever going to deliver happy endings. Now, the question is, does that mean that life only gives us happy endings? Well,
I suppose that's where the interaction with fate comes in, right? Because they're not talking about cheating in the sense of code anymore. They're talking about cheating in the sense of fate.
and amor fati, the love of fate. So I think there are lots of different ways to look at this section. For me it's very sad. It's kind of sweet, but sad, right? Because the only reason someone writes code and stacks the deck so that it only ever turns up happy endings is because they know that's obviously not how life works, right? There aren't only happy endings. So that, to me, this act of like engineering in your code, it's only going to have happy endings, only like creates that gap, like just points the finger to that gap that like, no, that is not how life works. I feel so much loss if I'm imagining myself as the writer of this code. I feel so much loss. I feel so much heartache at losing the you, whoever the you is, that I'm going to cheat in my code, and I am and the act does not change reality. It just is. It's just this little expression of how of kind of sadness. That's not the way the story goes. Or you could see it as a beautiful little act, a nice little gesture towards someone that the programmer likes. Or maybe they do get to be king of their own little reality when we write our code. um
I do like the way the brackets work here, because in the inform version they're colored differently. So when it's in
oh, let's
quotes,
can can,
for me
can,
at
can we
least,
see them? Show us in the code
yeah,
editor.
I can show
I'm
you.
always such a bad code reader because I never use these syntax highlighting code editors, which again are how programmers write code as I understand it, but that's fine. What
That's
do we
okay.
got? Can you
Um,
uh can you shrink your little window on the right hand side a little bit so that we can see
yes,
a little bit more of
should
that?
be able to do that, and
Or I
then
guess it didn't make it any bigger, but oh well.
no, I'm not actually sure if I can increase the size of the. No, I don't think I can
That's
make it.
okay. We
That's okay.
can we
Um, s- but I like the way in your version where we don't have this distinction between sort of the purple variable tags in quotes and the comment tags outside of the quotes, and the idea
hmm.
that then sort of the bracketed text and the sort of mechanics and the comments are kind of on the same page as opposed to being different registers that you're speaking in of functional and sort of non-functional. It's all sort of the same speech, which I think is interesting. Whereas
But
here
but
it's
it does help us notice more that when you get the syntax heading, the happiness of the end is usually false.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then no.
But the ending itself is going to be the happy ending, even if it's a false one, which again brings us back to our now I'm going to say the wrong word. What's our alethiometer,
Mhm.
which is about truth, which points towards truth. So I guess it would point out that this our little interactive fiction is false, right? On some level. Hmm. Lear says, if you somehow change the code to say 1 in 1,000, would we actually see the bad ending? I just realized that what he calls the ending is not actually the end of the game. The end of the game is when you go inside, when you find the author. Assuming you know that's how you get there, though, Lear. And of course, you have to read the code to know that's where you go, I think. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
just the end of that loop. Yeah, go ahead. What do you got? Spin it out.
Well, what I meant is, when you go through the game, so say you go east all the time and you reach after the third time this thing called end, which has the happy ending that we saw. Um, but then if you keep going east, it's just going to go back to beginning, complication, transformation, end, etc. And you can keep going east forever, and it will keep just going through the loop, the eternal recurrence. But if you type inside, then it says you found me, etc., etc., the end. And from there, all the choices you have are restart, restore, quit, or undo, as opposed to the eternal recurrence. So it's almost like this idea of transcending beyond the eternal recurrence. Like it has some Buddhist inspiration in it almost.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, and again, a lot of people see harmonies between Nietzsche and Buddhism. So our endless loops of Brian says our endless loops of good endings meaningless since it is a cheat, not real. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that, Brian?
Yeah, just that like framing it as a cheat. I first read that line when I was scrolling, like they're cheating on us, like yeah, in a relationship to be cheated on,
Oh
negative
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But then once I realized, oh, it's an innuendo with like in a game they're cheating. So it is like a negative thing. Like if I'm playing chess with my son or someone or like my partner and I'm losing on purpose, right? So that they could win, like is that honest?
Mm.
Not good, right? Is there
Or is that
something
or is that a loving gesture, that we do?
yeah,
That's
like exactly, yeah. So I think that's where like I don't know if there's a real answer there, but I think that it is kind of getting towards that like tension between those actions, right? Like, is that
yeah,
something that is helpful and that is meaningful or good, or is it robbing the person of reality, right? Yeah.
right, 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 right. Is it lying to them somehow? And Claire says, is happiness meaningless if it's temporary? And Arpita says, it's meaningful because it is temporary, maybe. Yeah, right. Which is what Nietzsche wants us to do, right? Nietzsche wants us to look at every moment as the moment, as because it's going to if it could like again Nietzsche, people always see him as sometimes people frame him as a nihilist, but I or nihilist. I think Nietzsche is trying to get us to love life. Would it, all of it, like love fate, even though that means there's going to be loss of heartache, illness, sickness, loss of, all these things. Would it be more meaningful if there was an infinitely small chance of a bad ending? At what point does it become meaningful? Yeah, good question. So again, it seems like such a simple little work, you know. It's in some ways it's not a very fun game to play of interactive fiction. It's certainly not a fun, it's definitely a frustrating game of interactive fiction unless you look at the code, right? And interactive fiction, Jeremy Douglas has written a little bit about this in his dissertation, but like interactive fiction is famously frustrating. There are these, it's not only the puzzles, it's trying to figure out what the verbs are. And this one is certainly meets that criteria. But then when you look at the code, when we cheat and look at the code, right? Which is again like, is that like looking at somebody's journal? Are we reading someone's journal? Are we found someone's love letters that they've written to someone else? Like again, that's the other thing I think it's interesting thing about this piece. Like when you read that do you assume that you is someone who's not you? Like you're the you who's reading the code, but do you assume that there's some like you've somehow found your way into some intimate connection between these two people, right? Or do you identify? Do you identify with the someone who loves you? Do you identify, who's the I of the story? I don't know. Again, to me, I love it. It's just it's an exquisite work. It's beautiful to work to look at, and yeah, epistolary code. I love it. Right. And again, I think it's something too. Like it's one of these pieces where like the more you sit with it, the more meaning arises. And Ants did Dan Ravipinto know that would happen? I don't know. Yeah, probably. He's a good enough writer that he knew that if you put those little elements in, and if we sit with it and we stew with it, that like those flavors would arrive. I'm sure he had some sense of that, of course. But did he know where he would take it? Is there a right answer out there? No, there's no right answer. No. Anyway, thank you guys for having us and for indulging in this little exploration of the code for an hour and a half on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the mail tips. Claire, take it away. Do our wrap up stuff.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sort of joining us today. I've just popped the reading group mailing list link in the chat in case you'd like to join and keep up. Orla, I don't know if you want to give a mini intro to what we'll be working on next week.
Yeah, so next week's session, we're going to be talking about some museum exhibition code. So we're going to be looking at a minimal computing project called Wax, and thinking about ways of generating exhibitions and code that generates exhibitions and how it gets used, why it gets used, etc., etc. So that should hopefully be quite fun.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Orla. Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Ant, Art, Lear, Brian, Alexa, Arpita for coming out for this little discussion. That was really a lot of fun. It really meant a lot to me.
Thank you so, so much, Mark. This is great. For me, as somebody who doesn't study interactive fiction, it was especially great because when I first opened the game and its code, I had no idea what I was looking at. So, and yeah.
I understand. I understand. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, you guys all have anyone celebrating Thanksgiving, enjoy it. If not, have a great rest of your week and we'll be in touch.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.